If you're over 70 and you feel like you're getting weaker every year, slower getting out of a chair, less steady on your feet, that's not just aging, that is a biological signal. Your body is not losing muscle because of time. It's losing muscle because it's not getting the right message, the right nutrients to maintain it. And today, we're going to talk about one of the most powerful, inexpensive, and scientifically proven foods you can add to breakfast to send that message loud and clear. That food is eggs. After the age of 70, something very real begins to change inside the human body, and it has nothing to do with willpower, laziness, or simply getting old. Your muscles begin to ignore the very signals that once kept them strong. Scientists call this anabolic resistance, and it means that the same foods that maintained your strength at 40 or 50 no longer tell your body to repair or rebuild muscle tissue. Instead, the body quietly shifts into preservation mode, breaking down muscle faster than it can replace it. This is why many older adults feel weaker each year despite eating what they believe is a normal diet. Research has shown that aging muscle requires a significantly stronger protein signal to activate muscle protein synthesis, the biological process that literally rebuilds muscle fibers. Without that signal, the body interprets breakfast not as fuel for strength, but simply as calories to burn. A bowl of cereal or a slice of toast may satisfy hunger, but metabolically it barely registers as nutrition to aging muscle. Blood sugar rises, insulin increases, and the body is told to store energy rather than repair tissue. Over time, this repeated message accelerates sarcopenia, the clinical term for age-related muscle loss that is strongly associated with falls, fractures, loss of independence, and even reduced lifespan. What's shocking is that studies estimate adults can lose up to 1% of their muscle mass per year after midlife if this process is not interrupted. That loss is not cosmetic. Muscle is the organ of longevity. It regulates glucose control, supports immune resilience, stabilizes joints, and acts as a metabolic reservoir during illness or stress. When muscle declines, the risk of hospitalization, disability, and metabolic disease rises dramatically. The tragedy is that most people are never told this is happening. They are told it's normal aging, when in fact it is a reversible nutritional signaling problem. Aging muscle is not broken, it is understimulated. It is waiting for a louder message, a clearer biochemical instruction that says rebuild, repair, stay strong. The body still has the machinery to maintain muscle well into advanced age, but it demands the right amino acid threshold to switch that machinery on. Without that threshold, muscle cells remain dormant, like lights in a house that never receive electricity. This is why two people of the same age can have dramatically different strength, mobility, and independence. One is unknowingly sending the signal for decline each morning, while the other is activating pathways that preserve lean mass and functional power. Understanding anabolic resistance changes the entire conversation about aging. Weakness is not inevitable. Frailty is not pre-programmed. The body is responding exactly as biology dictates based on the signals it receives. And when those signals change, the trajectory of aging can change with them. Inside your body, there is a microscopic switch that determines whether you grow stronger or grow weaker. And that switch is controlled by a single amino acid called leucine. Scientists have identified leucine as the primary trigger for muscle protein synthesis, the biological command that tells your muscles to repair, rebuild, and resist aging. Without enough leucine, that command is never sent. Your body does not partially rebuild muscle. It either turns the process on or it leaves it off. This is why many older adults can eat what seems like a reasonable amount of protein and still continue to lose strength year after year. The threshold to activate this switch rises with age, meaning the body now requires a more concentrated, highly bioavailable source of leucine to respond. Research in aging physiology shows that younger muscle can respond to small protein doses, but older muscle demands a stronger signal, almost like turning up the volume so the message can still be heard. When that signal is too weak, the body defaults to catabolism, slowly dismantling the very tissue that keeps you mobile and independent. This is not theoretical. Clinical studies have demonstrated that meals low in leucine fail to stimulate muscle repair in older adults, leaving muscle fibers in a prolonged state of breakdown. Over months and years, that silent failure accumulates into visible frailty, slower walking speed, reduced grip strength, and increased fall risk, all measurable predictors of mortality. Leucine acts through a pathway known as mTOR, a master regulator of cellular growth that senses whether the body has the resources to maintain itself. When leucine levels rise high enough, mTOR activates like a green light, initiating repair mechanisms that rebuild damaged proteins, strengthen muscle fibers, and support metabolic resilience. When leucine remains too low, that green light never appears. The system stays idle, not because it is broken, but because it has not been given permission to act. Modern breakfasts built around refined grains, sugars, or low-quality proteins provide calories but fail to deliver this critical amino acid concentration. The stomach may feel full, yet at the cellular level, the body is still starving for the signal to maintain lean mass. This disconnect explains why someone can eat regularly and still experience progressive weakness. In contrast, when a leucine-rich food is consumed in sufficient quantity, researchers observe a dramatic rise in muscle protein synthesis within hours, essentially flipping the metabolic environment from preservation to renewal. It is less like feeding the body and more like issuing a command. The difference between decline and maintenance can hinge on reaching that precise leucine threshold, a small molecular key with enormous physiological consequences. Understanding this changes how we view nutrition in later life. It is no longer about eating less or simply eating healthy by conventional standards. It is about delivering the exact biochemical message that aging muscle requires to remain alive, functional, and strong. When that message is heard, the body responds with repair. When it is absent, time appears to accelerate, even though the real driver is not age itself, but the silence of a signal never received. Every morning, millions of older adults begin their day with foods that feel comforting, familiar, and harmless, never realizing they may be accelerating one of the most dangerous biological declines of aging. A typical breakfast of toast, cereal, oatmeal, or fruit sends a powerful message into the bloodstream. But it is not a message of strength. It is a message of sugar metabolism. Within minutes, glucose rises, insulin surges, and the body shifts into storage mode, prioritizing the management of blood sugar instead of the repair of muscle tissue. What feels like a light, healthy start is metabolically interpreted as an emergency to control rising glucose levels. During this process, the body temporarily shuts down fat burning and dramatically reduces muscle protein synthesis, the very mechanism required to maintain strength as we age. Scientific measurements of muscle metabolism show that low-protein, high-carbohydrate breakfasts fail to cross the amino acid threshold necessary to stimulate repair, leaving muscle in a fasting-like state even though calories were consumed. In other words, the body has been fed, but the muscles have not. This creates a hidden form of malnutrition that is not about starvation, but about signaling failure. Over time, repeated insulin spikes combined with inadequate protein lead to increased inflammation, reduced insulin sensitivity, and a gradual breakdown of lean tissue. Muscle becomes collateral damage in a daily metabolic cycle that prioritizes sugar control over structural maintenance. Researchers have linked this pattern to accelerated sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass that directly correlates with frailty, slower walking speed, and loss of independence. One long-term observation found that older adults consuming lower-protein breakfasts had significantly poorer strength outcomes compared to those who distributed adequate protein earlier in the day. The timing matters because the body is most responsive to nutrient signaling in the morning when it is emerging from an overnight fast and looking for instructions about how to allocate its resources. If that instruction is primarily carbohydrate, the metabolism spends hours managing blood sugar instead of rebuilding tissue. If that pattern repeats daily, the cumulative effect is not subtle. It is measurable decline. Muscles shrink, balance weakens, recovery slows, and the ability to perform simple movements like standing, climbing stairs, or carrying groceries begins to fade. Many assume this is just aging unfolding naturally, but metabolically, it resembles a body being trained day after day to neglect its own structural framework. The tragedy is that this decline is often self-inflicted by dietary habits formed decades earlier, when the body could tolerate them. With age, tolerance disappears, but the habits remain. The result is a breakfast that satisfies tradition while silently undermining physiology. Understanding this reveals a startling truth. The first meal of the day is not just nourishment, it is instruction. It tells the body whether to invest in survival machinery or to slowly dismantle it. When that instruction lacks sufficient protein, the body does exactly what it is told, conserving energy while allowing muscle to fade, mistaking this nutritional pattern not as care, but as a signal that strength is no longer required. Beneath the surface of aging, there is a quiet fire that begins to burn inside the body, a slow, persistent inflammation that most people never feel, but that profoundly changes how tissues heal, repair, and survive. Scientists often refer to this process as inflammaging, a chronic low-grade immune activation that interferes with nearly every system responsible for maintaining strength. Unlike the sharp inflammation of an injury, this kind does not announce itself with pain. It works silently, disrupting cellular communication, damaging mitochondria, and blocking the very pathways that allow muscles to regenerate. Research has shown that elevated inflammatory markers such as interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein are strongly associated with reduced muscle mass, slower gait speed, and increased risk of disability in older adults. Inflammation essentially tells the body that it is under constant stress, and when the body believes it is under threat, it shifts priorities away from building tissue toward conserving energy for survival. Muscle repair becomes secondary, even unnecessary, in this biological hierarchy. Over time, this miscommunication leads to weaker muscle fibers, impaired recovery after activity, and a growing sense of fatigue that many mistakenly attribute to age alone. What makes this especially dangerous is that chronic inflammation also reduces the body's sensitivity to anabolic signals, meaning even when protein is consumed, the repair response is blunted. It is as if the construction workers have been called to rebuild, but the site remains locked behind a biochemical barrier. Nutrients that once fueled regeneration are now diverted into managing oxidative stress and immune activation. This creates a vicious cycle where inflammation accelerates muscle loss, and muscle loss further worsens metabolic health, which then feeds more inflammation. Scientific literature has repeatedly demonstrated that individuals with higher inflammatory burden experience faster progression of sarcopenia and poorer outcomes after illness or hospitalization. The body becomes less resilient, less adaptable, and less capable of bouncing back from even minor physical stress. Yet, this process is not inevitable. Certain nutrients play a direct role in calming inflammatory pathways and restoring the internal environment required for repair. These compounds influence membrane stability, antioxidant defenses, and gene expression related to recovery. When present consistently, they help shift the body from a defensive state into a regenerative one, allowing muscle protein synthesis to proceed without interference. This is why the quality of food matters as much as the quantity. Calories alone cannot extinguish chronic inflammation. They can, in some cases, intensify it. But when the body receives the right signals, inflammatory activity begins to settle, oxidative damage is reduced, and the cellular machinery responsible for rebuilding muscle can function again. The change is not immediate, but it is measurable, as markers of inflammation decline and physical strength stabilizes. What appears outwardly as renewed vitality is, at the microscopic level, a restoration of balance, a transition from constant alarm to cautious repair. Understanding this hidden fire reveals that muscle loss is not simply about insufficient protein or lack of exercise, but about whether the internal environment allows rebuilding to occur at all. When inflammation dominates, decline accelerates. When it is controlled, the body regains its capacity to maintain itself, proving that aging tissues are far more responsive to biological conditions than most people have ever been told. Strength is not just a matter of muscle size. It is the result of an intricate conversation happening every second between your brain and your body, a communication network that determines whether you move with confidence or hesitation. As we age, this connection begins to weaken, not only because of muscle loss, but because the neurological signals that control those muscles become less efficient. Scientists describe this as a decline in neuromuscular function, where the brain's ability to recruit muscle fibers becomes slower and less coordinated, leading to reduced balance, slower reflexes, and an increased risk of falls. Research shows that after the age of 70, the loss of motor neurons, the cells responsible for activating muscle contraction, can significantly impair strength even if some muscle mass remains. This means that weakness is not just a structural issue, it is a signaling issue. When the brain cannot effectively communicate with muscle, movements that were once automatic become effortful, and stability begins to erode. Studies have linked this decline in neuromuscular communication to a higher incidence of falls, which remain one of the leading causes of injury and loss of independence among older adults. A single fall can initiate a cascade of immobility, hospitalization, and rapid physical decline, demonstrating how critical this brain-muscle partnership truly is. Nutrition plays plays an unexpected yet powerful role in preserving this connection. Certain nutrients are essential for maintaining the integrity of cell membranes, supporting neurotransmitter production, and protecting the delicate structures that allow nerves to transmit signals efficiently. Without these nutrients, the electrical language of movement becomes distorted, like static interrupting a conversation. The result is delayed reaction time, reduced coordination, and muscles that fail to activate fully when needed. Emerging research has shown that when the body receives adequate building blocks for both muscle tissue and neural health, improvements can be seen not only in strength but also in functional performance. How quickly someone can stand, how steadily they walk, how confidently they navigate their environment. These are the real-world measures of vitality, far more meaningful than numbers on a scale or even laboratory values. Muscle that is properly nourished responds more quickly to neural input, contracts more efficiently, and resists fatigue, creating a feedback loop that reinforces movement and independence. Activity then further strengthens the neural pathways, preserving what scientists call neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and maintain control over the body even in later decades of life. This dynamic relationship explains why maintaining muscle is inseparable from maintaining cognitive and neurological resilience. The body is not a collection of isolated systems. It is an integrated network where nutrition, nerve health, and muscular function rise or fall together. When this network is supported, individuals often rediscover stability, endurance, and confidence in motion. When it is neglected, decline can appear sudden and irreversible, even though it developed gradually through years of insufficient signaling support. Understanding this reveals that preserving strength is not merely about preventing weakness. It is about safeguarding the communication that allows the brain and body to function as a unified system, sustaining the movements that define autonomy, dignity, and quality of life. Muscle is often thought of as something cosmetic, something tied to appearance or physical performance. But biologically, it is one of the most important organs of survival, a dynamic tissue that regulates metabolism, protects against disease, and determines how well the body withstands the stresses of aging. Unlike fat, muscle is metabolically active, acting as a reservoir for glucose disposal, a stabilizer of blood sugar, and a critical site for insulin sensitivity. When muscle mass declines, the body loses one of its primary tools for controlling metabolic health, and this loss is strongly associated with the development of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and increased mortality. Research has demonstrated that individuals with greater muscle mass tend to have better glucose regulation and lower levels of systemic inflammation, even in advanced age. This is because muscle acts like a metabolic engine, continuously drawing nutrients into cells where they can be used for repair and energy rather than circulating in the bloodstream where they may cause damage. As muscle diminishes, this engine slows, and the consequences ripple throughout the entire body. Blood sugar becomes harder to manage, energy levels fluctuate, and recovery from illness becomes more difficult. Clinical studies have shown that older adults with reduced muscle mass face longer hospital stays, higher complication rates, and a significantly greater risk of losing independence after medical events. Muscle is also deeply involved in immune function, supplying amino acids that the body relies on during times of stress, infection, or injury. Without adequate reserves, the body is forced to break down its remaining tissue to meet these demands, accelerating frailty at precisely the moment resilience is needed most. This is why scientists increasingly describe sarcopenia not merely as a condition of weakness, but as a major predictor of overall health outcomes. The presence or absence of muscle can influence how long and how well a person lives. It affects mobility, yes, but it also affects hormonal signaling, mitochondrial efficiency, and the regulation of inflammatory pathways that shape aging itself. When muscle is preserved, the body maintains a buffer against metabolic chaos, allowing systems to remain balanced even under physiological strain. When muscle is lost, that buffer disappears, leaving organs more vulnerable to dysfunction. What is remarkable is that muscle remains highly responsive to proper nutritional signaling even late in life, retaining the capacity to adapt and rebuild when given the right conditions. This adaptability challenges the assumption that decline is unavoidable and instead points to a model of aging that is modifiable through metabolic support. Every meal becomes an opportunity to either sustain this critical organ or allow it to erode further. Understanding muscle as a central regulator of health transforms how we view longevity, shifting the focus from merely preventing disease to actively maintaining the biological infrastructure that keeps the body stable, resilient, and capable of meeting the demands of life well into later decades.